Hello, I'm Robert Pollak, and I'm at the Ellenville Public Library and Museum, and I'm proud to be here to curate the show on American comic book art, Masters of American Comic Books, and I have let's say 50 years of artwork up on the walls. I picked 38 pieces from my personal collection, and I brought it here to the museum and the gallery link for your pleasure. There's some amazing pen and ink pieces here, and I hope you'll enjoy looking at them and the detail, and realize that this is a big part of our pop culture and that influenced a lot of contemporary artists. Okay. I'm going to start this tour by talking about these Avengers pages behind me, because they're very hard to come by, and I was fortunate enough to get them when I was very young. Most of the time I went to comic conventions in New York City, Big Apple comic conventions, some other ones, and I knew a lot of artists, and a lot of art was discarded after it was printed. But anyway, this is from Avengers number 9 by Don Heck, and it's from 1964. It's a very early page from the Avengers. It's really the first year of the Avengers, and it's really cool also because it has Captain America, Iron Man, Giant Man, Thor. It has Captain America going, oy vey, I have a headache, you know, Thor, and they have this spaceship that goes through dimensions, and they're the villains are in that spaceship going through the dimensions, and it's Baron Zemo, the Enchantress, and the Executioner. And this is a really nice early page of the Avengers by Don Heck. Next to it is another Avengers by Don Heck, but this is issue 20. And this is from 1965. Here it really looks very polished. Even though it's the same penciler, Don Heck, here we have Wally Wood, who created Thunder Agents and Dynamo and a lot of other things. Wally Wood was a great inker and a great artist. He is now inking Don Heck on this. So you see a difference in style. And you have the Mandarin, Iron Man, the Swordsman. This is an iconic panel here with Quicksilver, Captain America, the Scarlet Witch. They used to use this in Marvel ads to say join the Mighty Marvel Marching Society, or whatever it was called at that time in the 60s. That got kids to subscribe and get some kind of free no prize from Stan Lee. And in the last panel, Iron Man talking to the Avengers. Then we move on. This is from Avengers number 41. 1967 by John Buscema. John Buscema came into Marvel and started working on some of the titles, including the Avengers. And this is his beautiful work. And here you have Diablo and the Dragon Man fighting Giant Man in his new costume. And there's lots of action and a beautiful flow through the center panel here. This is a really nice early example of John Buscema's artwork for Marvel on the Avengers. Now, John Buscema became one of the biggest names, next to Jack Kirby, of course, and a few others, at Marvel, and he stayed there a long time. Next to this Avengers page, I have a Wolverine graphic novel page, and this one is from 1992, and it's a Wolverine graphic novel. And here we have John Buscema penciling and inking his own artwork. And this also has a nice flow in the center panel. And I kind of stepped back when I was talking with Joe Staten the other day, and we looked at that center panel from 1967 in 1992 and said that flow is in both of them in the center panels, and the layout is kind of similar if you think about it. But John Buscema was one of the great Marvel artists, cartoonists, and very famous for Conan the Barbarian and so many other titles. And this is one of his own penciled and inked. In the mid-1980s, Steve Rude created this unique character called Nexus. I think Nexus over here looks a lot like Cyclops, but the whole run of Nexus, and Steve Rude is still doing it today, it's an amazing sci-fi series, and this is from Nexus number 8. It's the cover in pen and ink. He only did 2 or 3 pen and ink covers. Steve Root is a painter, and most of his Nexus covers are really fine arts paintings of the characters and the action. But this is a highly recommended series to read. I started with Nexus #1, and I'm still reading it today. And that means I started reading this in 1985, and now it's 2023. And it's still going, and it still has this magnificent art. So just to show you what the original is and the printed piece, here's the original cover for Nexus #8 from 1985. And you could see how beautiful the pen and ink work is, and then how colorful the cover is. It really drew in a lot of people to read it and has a big following. And here's John Carter, Warlord of Mars, and it's from 1977 by Gil Kane, and it's inked by Pablo Marcos. It's a beautiful cover. He has really dynamic anatomy in it. And here too, I have the actual printed piece to show you how colorful the printed piece was next to the pen and ink. I personally love the pen and ink because I like to see the artist's work, and you see a lot of detail. But these colorful comic book covers really sold the comics. They did. They drew in the kids, they drew in the adults, and these were ongoing series and dramas. They were quite wonderful. But that's John Carter, Warlord of Mars by Gil Kane. I was fortunate enough to be in touch with Al Plastino, and in 1993 I asked Al if he could do a Superman drawing for me. So Al had done a lot of Superman comics in the 50s and 60s, and the Batman comic strip for the newspapers in the 1960s after Joe Giella. And here we have Superman and Luthor, but Luthor is the original Luthor, who was a criminal, and he wore a gray prison uniform, and he was always building and creating devices to try to defeat Superman, his enemy, because he was always mad at Superman because it was Superman's fault that he got bald. So that was the kind of premise that made him a criminal and take up the crime and all that. But Al Plastino did a lot of work in newspaper, syndicated newspaper comic strips, ghosting for other artists, and he was one of the original assistants that helped Siegel and Schuster. It was Al Plastino and Kurt Swan and Wayne Boring, all kind of worked there in the 40s, 50s, developing Superman, and they took Superman into the 1950s and 60s. And Al Plastino did a lot of work in the 60s along with Kurt Swan, who did really classic Superman all the way up through the end of his career, probably you know, in the late 1990s or around that time. But Kurt Swan was a big name, Al Plastino was a big name, and Wayne Boring. They were famous for their images of Superman, and this is Al Plastino's image of Superman and classic villain Lex Luthor. I'm in front of three very special pieces. These are all done by Russ Manning in the early 1960s. Russ Manning became very well known for doing Tarzan, and this Tarzan is from 1965 by Russ Manning. And he had a very simple, clean line, good anatomy, a wonderful storyteller. But Tarzan at Gold Key was so popular that they wanted him to do kind of a Tarzan of the future. So Russ Manning came up with the idea for Magnus Robot Fighter. And this is one of the preliminary drawings from the early 60s that Russ Manning did. This is extremely rare. And here's Magnus Robot Fighter, who looks just like Tarzan, and instead of a loincloth, he has like a red chainmail kind of skirt on, or tunic, whatever, kind of, and a black belt, and a robot, and then his girlfriend Legia here with a bit of a 60s bouffant hairdo. So this was presented to Gold Key, and they really loved the idea of Magnus Robot Fighter being in the future when man has gotten really lazy and Magnus is there to save humanity from their laziness and for robots and artificial intelligence taking over the whole world. And what's really strange about this, I read these comics in 1963, and now at 2023, we have artificial intelligence and robots doing a lot of work, and we're kind of becoming a lazy society ourselves. So we were warned by this comic book in 1963 what the future could possibly be. So Magnus actually became very popular. And here's a Magnus Robot Fighter page from 1963, and it has Lyja here, Magnus's girlfriend, and her hair's parted and falling on the shoulders, and her classic kind of see-through dress way above the knee, and a little bit, it was a very sexy dress because it gave the illusion of see-through. And the villain here is Mech Man, and he's actually a real human who wants to be a robot, so he coated his body in metal and pretends to be a robot, but he has all this technology at his hands, and he controls all this artificial intelligence and robots in North America. And Magnus is called to help defeat this villain who's taking over all the computers and the controls and all of North America. And this is Lyja's father, who's a senator, Senator Klain, and Magnus comes in to save the day and to kind of promote, like, hey, we're human beings, and we like technology and need technology, but we don't want to be taken over by technology. And this is very cool art. I'd say the first 12 issues of this by Russ Manning are probably classic reading for science fiction collectors. I just wanted to mention about the costumes, because you see how Lyja's costume went from a bouffant hairdo and kind of a Nehru collared long sleeve miniskirt outfit from the 60s into this outfit. Magnus, in this preliminary drawing, doesn't have boots or a shirt. The actual character has white boots, and then he has a Nehru collared kind of shirt or tunic also on top, which would be red. So the finished costume for Russ Manning on Magnus has the full red shirt with the Nehru collar and white boots on Magnus. Lyja's hair is down, and she has a black kind of see-through mini skirt cocktail dress. Here I have a really nice Hawkman splash page by Murphy Anderson. It's from Hawkman number 10, 1965. And Murphy Anderson was a master inker. He had drawn the Buck Rogers in the 25th Century newspaper comic strip. He ended up working on a lot of titles at DC Comics like Atomic Knights, Adam Strange. He ended up being the premier inker on Kurt Swan on Superman. So Murphy Anderson had a long and illustrious career, and his work on Hawkman from the 60s is some of my favorite. And you could see his beautiful pen and ink work. Most of this is actually brushwork. And before Hawkman got his own comic, Joe Kubert was drawing Hawkman and reviving him, and then Murphy Anderson got him, and they featured him first in Mystery in Space. So Hawkman was a Mystery in Space by Murphy Anderson, and Murphy had signed this and personalized it to me. So it went from the golden age where Hawkman had stopped to being reborn in the silver age through Mystery in Space and Hawkman. But Murphy Anderson is one of my favorite Hawkman artists, and Joe Kubert is also a great artist on Hawkman. Next to these, we have something a little older. This one is from 1953. I was 1 year old at this time, and it's the Durango Kid, and it's art by Fred Gardenier. And this is a beautiful example of his work with the skeleton and the bad guys and the good guy, the Durango Kid with his mask on. And it's the cowboy genre, which was very popular in the 1950s. In the late 70s, the Star Wars movies, in the late 70s to the early 80s, the original trilogy, were just phenomenal, and everyone loved those movies. And of course, the comic book industry ate it up. I have behind me two Star Wars British weeklies, and I have behind me an Al Williamson Empire Strikes Back cover. So I'm going to start by talking about this one. This was Star Wars Weekly in England, and they would reprint the comic books that Marvel did on Star Wars in England, but have new covers. So this is John Buscema, the same guy who did the Avengers and the Wolverine, drawing a Star Wars cover for the British Star Wars Weekly. He never drew an issue in America, but he did this cover for the Star Wars Weekly in England. So it's kind of a rare piece, and it's inked by Bill Sienkiewicz. In the center here, this is one of my favorite pieces because it was by my friend Al Williamson. And Al did this as a cover for The Empire Strikes Back. And that was my favorite movie in the original trilogy. And it was Al's favorite also because it reminded us of the old Flash Gordon Buster Crabbe movie serials where they had the Hawkman in Sky City. So in this one they had Lando Calrissian in Sky City, so it's very similar, and we like that kind of nostalgic vibe to it. So this is an Al Williamson cover for The Empire Strikes Back. And the final Star Wars piece here from my collection is by Carmine Infantino, and it was inked by Dan Green, and it's retelling, it's reprinting the American comics with a whole new cover by Carmine, and it's some kind of strange character coming out of a spaceship, and all the Star Wars characters are like in awe of her and her powers. Continuing on with the science fiction theme, this is a 1949 Flash Gordon page from the comic books. Because the comic strips in the newspapers were so popular and the Buster Crabbe movie serials were so popular that people were watching, they had to do a comic book to go with it because people wanted more Flash Gordon in the 40s and 50s. They just loved it. So they got Paul Norris, who is a well-known cartoonist and drew Brick Bradford and the Time Top for the newspapers, and they got Paul Norris to do Flash Gordon comic books. And Alex Raymond, Austin Briggs, Macroboy were doing the daily and Sunday comic strips for the newspapers. Next to it, King Features in the 60s, this is 1967, tried to start their own comic book company, King Comics, and they took their characters like the Phantom and Flash Gordon and Mandrake the Magician and made comic books. And Al Williamson was one of the artists who did the Star Wars I talked about earlier that was on this series, and he left, and his friend Reed Crandall, who's a really good illustrator and well-known cartoonist, Reed Crandall took over the Flash Gordon comic book for King Features while it ran, and it ran into Charlton Comics. When King Features folded the comic book division, they handed it over to Charlton Comics, and they continued the Flash Gordon series, and Reed Crandall had a few issues under Charlton and also under King Comics. In the front entrance case for the gallery link, I have 3 pieces by Neal Adams. This one is Robin. This was done 2001 or something at King Con in Brooklyn. And this is 2017 Batman. And this is probably 2014 Green Arrow. Neal Adams was really quite famous and popular in the comic book industry. He also did the Ben Casey comic strip. I don't have any of the pages from Green Lantern, Green Arrow, or Spectre that he became famous for, or Superman, but I do have these 3 wonderful heads that Neal drew for me, and I really appreciate them, and you can see his fine line work in it, especially if you go in close to the Batman. You can see his pencils, you can see the ink, and he's quite an amazing artist. I saved this piece for last because it's different from the other ones. This is a 1959 Katie Keene piece by Bill Wogum, and a lot of kids love the Katie Keene comics. It was created in 1945. This is Katie Keene. This is her boyfriend K.O. Kelly, and these were fun comic books for kids, and they had like puzzles in them and poems in them and paper dolls and short stories and all kinds of cool things that kids would you know, buy one 25-cent issue for the summer, and it would entertain them through the whole summer when they went to summer camp or away or whatever. But Katie Keene was very popular. And what's interesting here is this face was definitely drawn by Bill Wogum, but at this point in his career, Katie Keene comics were so popular and he was doing so many, he had two or three female assistants working, and he eventually handed the drawing of Katie Keene over to one of his assistants, and this is her drawing very realistically a Katie Keene, and you can see in the eyes all the eyelashes and all the fine brushwork and stuff, whereas Bill Wogum himself is a little more cartoony in style. So this is a Bill Wogum Katie Keene Pinup Parade number 6 from 1959, and definitely Bill Wogum is here, but also one of his lady assistants that drew Katie is doing the female character because it's a little out of style for him. And here I have a special piece that artist Joe Staten, who by the way lives in Kingston, New York, so he's a neighbor. He used to do the Dick Tracy comic strip. He's done Green Lantern. He's done a lot of stuff for DC Comics and Marvel, including the Legion of Superheroes, the Justice Society. Here, Joe Staten is doing an animated style of Batman and Robin fighting Poison Ivy. And it's really quite a bold splash page. I really like it. They did this for a drug company, for Claritin. They used Poison Ivy because they were talking about allergies. So it worked out perfect. But Robin did not sneeze through the whole adventure, I was told. Next to it I have a Batman page. And this one is from Detective Comics Annual number 8. And the inker on this was Sal Buscema. And I think maybe it was Ron Friends who did the penciling, but I'm not sure. But it's signed by Sal Buscema, who I got it from. And you have a really nice Batman and Alfred and a more updated modern Robin, kind of a teenager. It's a very beautiful page, and the dark areas are very well spotted. From Batman, we go to Superman, and this is Ron Friends, again, penciling, and Sal Buscema inking in the splash page for Adventures of Superman, 1999 splash page. Next to it, another Joe Staten piece, and this one is a recreation of his 1979 Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. And he did this recreation for me at my request, and he did it in 2021. And he did one change from the original cover. The way Superboy is holding Shadowlass, he changed the way he was holding her from the original cover. So it makes it a little different from the original, but no one would even notice that change, but he just thought it looked better, so he made the improvement. But this would have been Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes from 1979, Joe Staten. So after Batman, Superman, of course, we have Wonder Woman. This is a 1947, 1/3 of a page of Wonder Woman by H.G. Peters, the original creator of Wonder Woman. And it's kind of cool because here you have Wonder Woman rescuing some of her friends from the Cheetah gang. You don't have the Cheetah, the leader of the gang, in it, but you have her gang in the Cheetah outfit, and Wonder Woman with her magic lasso, and Steve Trevor, her boyfriend. So you have a lot of things going on in the two panels. It would have been nice to have the whole page, but I'm fortunate enough to have this, and it's the original Wonder Woman, the way she looked and was originally created. Wonder Woman was revived after many decades of running in DC Comics by different artists, but there was a big revival by George Perez in 1988. And this is a beautiful, magnificent, and wonderfully rendered page from Wonder Woman number 19. It got all new numbering when George Perez took over in 1988. And you have the goddess Circe here, who's very evil, Wonder Woman in bondage, and all these strange mythological creatures from ancient Greece. And Wonder Woman has really succumbed to Circe in this page. And it's a very special page, and I knew George, he was a great artist, and this is really his pride and joy doing the Wonder Woman series. Next to Wonder Woman, we go to the Golden Age and Silver Age Green Lanterns. Here you have the Golden Age Green Lantern, Alan Scott, and the Silver Age Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, fighting each other, by Pat Broderick. And Pat did this for me in 2020 during the pandemic at my request, because he drew the Silver Age, Bronze Age Green Lantern. So it was kind of nice to have the Green Lanterns from the different Earths, Earth 2 and the one we are familiar with from the Silver Age to the Bronze Age. Now, continuing with the Green Lantern from the Silver Age, from the Golden Age, over here is a cover for Justice Society of America number 28, 2009, and it's by Jerry Ordway. And here, it's the original 1940s Justice Society, a lot of the members. You have Wildcat, The Flash, Hourman, Liberty Bell, and in the center, again, we're featuring the Golden Age Green Lantern. And what's cool about this was the actual comic book that it was printed in, and the actual printed page is quite colorful and beautiful. So here you have the printed colored page right next to the original pen and ink art. And one more with the original Green Lantern. This is by Todd McFarlane, who's very famous for doing the Spider-Man stuff and the Hulk for Marvel. And here you have Alan Scott again in Infinity Incorporated, 1985, drawn by Todd McFarlane. Here's Alan Scott with Jade and Obsidian, and this is like an origin story, and it has Green Lantern here. And the original Harley Quinn was a villain in the 1940s for the original Green Lantern. And here they get married and have children, and their children are grown up, Jade and Obsidian, and they're part of Infinity Incorporated. So that was the Justice Society of America's crossover to Infinity Incorporated and a new generation of heroes. This is Warlord by Mike Grell. This is Warlord number 12, the last page of the story. Mike Grell had signed it. It's from 1978, and Warlord was a really great series that Mike did for DC Comics, and it was him writing it, drawing it, inking it for the most part. It was a wonderful series, over 100 issues, which means it ran over 10 years. And he got this because he was doing so beautiful pen work and ink work for the Legion of Superheroes and Superboy and other DC Comics. They just had a lot of faith in him and said, you want to do Warlord, go with it. And it became a very successful series. And this one's from 1978. And it's beautifully drawn. And in my opinion, you could see that Mike had an influence from Neil Adams at this time. This almost looks like a Neil Adams figure here. And I asked Mike once, I said, how did you learn to draw? He said, well, when I was in the Army and I was in a foreign country, I was reading Neil Adams comic books, the ones he was drawing, and that's what kind of prompted me to become a cartoonist, the influence of Neil Adams, and you see it in here. Next to this we have Jack Kirby, and of course everyone knows Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. They're famous as a team for creating most of the popular characters at Marvel Comics. And this is Jack Kirby in 1976. Jack Kirby had left Marvel, gone to DC Comics, and came back to Marvel. And when he came back to Marvel, he was doing these Captain America pages with Frank Giacoia inking them. So they're quite nice, and they're very much at the peak of Kirby's style. This is Daredevil by Gene Colan. Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, number 69. This is from 1970. Gene Colan had his own unique style. The spotting of the black areas was beautiful. The different angles, the action, the movement through it. Gene Colan was a master cartoonist. Later on, he actually went over to DC Comics and was doing Batman comics and Wonder Woman comics too. Here we have a really nice Spider-Man page from Spider-Man number 70, 1990. Note, it's not the Amazing Spider-Man because it's a new numbering. It's Spider-Man, and this is Johnny Romita Jr., John Romita's son. And John Romita was very famous for doing Daredevil and all the Spider-Man issues after Steve Ditko, and his son became a Spider-Man artist also. And this is John Romita Jr. doing Spider-Man number 70, a nice action page. And I do believe that Al Williamson inked this page. What's unique about this is in all the black areas, because it's a battle scene in the rain, that the inker used a razor blade to put pressure and make the scratch lines to look like it's raining. So this was a lot of work and a lot of scratching lines to make it look like it's torrential rains. It's kind of a cool page. And then over here, this is John Byrne doing the X-Men with Tom Palmer inking, and it's a really cool page. This is from the year 2000. It's the Hidden Years, number 5. And here you have the Angel, you have the Beast, you have Lorna Dane, and you have Havoc, and then you have Kazar, the Lord of the Hidden Land. So it's beautifully inked by Tom Palmer, and of course it's John Byrne's artwork, and John Byrne became one of the big names at Marvel and DC also. It's an excellent example. This is Jezebel Jade number 2. It's part of the Johnny Quest series, and it was from 1998 by Adam Kubert. Adam Kubert was the son of the famous Joe Kubert, who did a lot of work for DC Comics on Hawkman and a lot of the combat and army issues, and he did Tales of the Green Beret for the newspapers. But his two sons followed in his footsteps, in Joe Kubert's footsteps, and this is Adam Kubert doing Jezebel Jade from Johnny Quest, and here's Ace Banyan, and here's Jezebel Jade. An amazing inking and all the brickwork and the alleyway battle with the laundry blowing in the air by the fire escape. This is very well drawn and extremely well researched piece. Over here, oh, before I forget, I have to show you, this is what it looked like in color. Over here we have the revival of Thunder Agents. This is drawn by Dave Cockrum, and it's inked by Murphy Anderson. We talked about Murphy Anderson on Hawkman. Dave Cockrum was originally Murphy Anderson's assistant or apprentice. Here, Dave Cockrum has done work on the X-Men and has become a big name, and he's helping revive Thunder Agents, Wally Wood's Thunder Agents, does the penciling, and now Murphy is doing the inking on this. And it's a really nice page which has the rich ink work of Murphy Anderson on it. I hope you've all enjoyed the tour of Masters of Comic Book Art. I've spent over 50 years collecting these pieces by meeting the artists, going to conventions. I've written dozens of articles on comic book and comic strip art history. I think they're beautiful pen and ink works. I hope all of you get a chance to come to the museum, the Ellenville Public Library Museum, and come to the gallery link and get to see these in person, because you could get up close to them. You could see some of the editorial notes, you could see some of the pencil lines, and you could see the beautiful ink work, and you could pick your favorites, and it's a trip down memory lane, and it's a little bit of art history from our pop culture. Thank you for coming and being part of this.